What would you do if you boarded an international flight with a proper business class ticket, your seat clearly marked 2A, your itinerary carefully arranged by your mother down to the last detail? But just because you're a black teenager wearing a hoodie and carrying a film camera, a man in uniform points at you and says, "This seat isn't yours." He didn't ask for your ticket, didn't care about your name. He just looked at you and assumed you don't belong. That boy's name was Jalen Monroe, 16 years old, a street photography enthusiast who had just received the first business class ticket of his life from his mom, flying from New York to Tokyo to attend an international photography workshop. But less than 5 minutes after Jalen sat down, a large shadow loomed over him. It was Captain Harrison, a man who couldn't believe that a black teenager could be in that cabin unless he had snuck in. And then, in front of dozens of watching eyes, he gave the order. "You need to leave this seat immediately." Jalen held up his ticket, but no one cared to look. A few wealthy passengers began whispering. A female flight attendant took the captain's hand and whispered something. No one could hear what. Only one person was silently recording every word in his mind. Jalen. He didn't fight back, didn't raise his voice. He simply pulled out his phone and called his mom. And that mother, she wasn't just any mother. Morning light poured into the marble-tiled foyer of the Monroe estate, streaming through the glass wall overlooking the Hudson River, casting a golden glow across the room like a quiet blessing. Jalen Monroe stood in the middle of it all, clutching a small leather suitcase and a silver envelope containing his boarding pass, his name embossed in soft cursive on the front. His heartbeat thumped gently beneath his skin, not from fear, but from a quiet thrill. Today was his day, 16 years old, his first time flying alone. Not for summer camp, not on a school trip, but to Tokyo, alone, in business class, on his own terms. This wasn't just a vacation, it was a rite of passage. His mother, Cassandra Monroe, stood a few feet away, tall, poised, commanding, in a sharply tailored charcoal pantsuit, one hand holding a coffee, the other scrolling through her phone. Despite the constant flashing of Wall Street alerts on her screen, her eyes never left him. "Your seat is 2A. First row of the cabin, full recline, first served. I called ahead. There'll be staff waiting for you at Tokyo Airport. Don't argue about carrying luggage." Her voice was firm with a touch of warmth. Jalen smiled faintly. "I can carry my own camera bag, Mom." Cassandra softened slightly, stepped closer, and adjusted his white shirt collar. "I know this isn't your usual style, but you look good. Really good." Jalen glanced down. Crisp white button-up shirt tucked into black jeans, spotless Vans, hair neatly trimmed, a navy jacket folded over his suitcase. No camera strap, no hoodie. Not quite himself, but close enough to pass in that cabin. A compromise between the real him and the version that was easier for others to accept. "Thank you, Mom, for the trip, and for letting me go alone." His voice was quiet but sincere, avoiding her gaze. Cassandra squinted, not with suspicion but with thoughtfulness. "You've earned this. Top 5 in the photography program. That invitation from the Tokyo Street Collective wasn't a fluke. You don't need a chaperone. You need space. And I just want to make sure you have it. Your way, with a safety net underneath." She pointed to the envelope. "Sit in that seat like it belongs to you, because it does." Jalen nodded, her words settling on his shoulders, weighty but not heavy. He had few memories of his father. The man had left when he was barely a year old, vanishing like a distant myth. But his mother was the opposite. She was fire, steel, logic. Not only had she climbed to the top of the finance world, she had redesigned the entire system and stamped her name on it. Monroe Equity Group wasn't just a company, it was an empire. And he, whether he liked it or not, was its heir. But today wasn't about power. Today was about freedom. A boy with a camera and a plane ticket. A journey to Tokyo. A beginning. The black car rolled up the private driveway minutes later. Cassandra leaned down to kiss his forehead, a rare gesture, and whispered, "2A, Jalen. You earned it. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise." Then she turned back into the house, already rejoining the rhythm of virtual meetings and billion-dollar deals. Jalen sat quietly in the car, watching the city recede through the window. His fingers occasionally flipped the envelope. Through the slit, silver letters gleamed. Skyfront Airways, Flight 311, Seat 2A, Business Class, JFK to Tokyo, NRT. He wasn't scared, at least not of flying. He'd flown dozens of times, but always with an adult, always within structure. This time he was on his own. No one to guide him, no one to explain, no one to unbuckle his seatbelt for him. Freedom, strange, cold. At the Skyfront terminal, everything gleamed and hummed with quiet luxury. Automated check-in, fast security lane. An attendant ushered him through the priority line as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Maybe for people who looked like them, it was. Jalen kept a neutral face, camera bag slung across his shoulder, ticket in hand, walked like he belonged. Even though a question kept ringing in his head, is someone going to stop me? But no one did. At gate B14, he scanned the scene. Screens blinked with boarding groups. A man in a three-piece suit tapped rapidly on a tablet. A woman in designer athleisure stroked the head of a toy poodle, peeking from a Louis Vuitton bag while adjusting her mask. Jalen stood behind them, fingers tapping lightly on his boarding pass. Then the speaker chimed for business class. He stepped forward. The jet bridge smelled like air conditioning and a faint trace of lemon. Jalen walked slowly. The flight attendant at the aircraft door smiled with polished professionalism. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Monroe." Her eyes flicked over his ticket. "2A, just to the left here. Can I assist you with anything?" "No, thank you," he replied quickly. She nodded and stepped aside. Jalen entered the cabin. Skyfront 311's business class cabin was a symphony of soft light, supple leather, and the hush of wealth. Cream-colored seats curved like cocoons. Hidden lights glowed from each panel edge. Touchscreens embedded into seat walls. The space radiated luxury without flaunting it. The scent of new leather and subtle oak lingered. Jalen found seat 2A by the window, the one his mother had chosen so he could watch the city shrink beneath the wing. He carefully stowed his backpack and checked the camera pouch. Then he sat. The seat cradled him like a pod, soft, warm, and almost unfamiliar. He glanced around. No one cared who he was. No one noticed that a young black boy was sitting in seat number 2A. Silence wrapped around him. Jalen leaned his head back. The tension slowly seeped from his shoulders. He pulled out his camera, not to shoot, just to hold it. Its weight was familiar, grounding. Outside the window, the runway glistened under the morning sun. He pictured the alleys of Shibuya, the Asakusa Shrine, the faces he'd capture with his vintage lens. A small smile passed across his lips. He was here. Right seat, right flight, right journey. And then, the shadow fell, large, heavy, abrasive. He looked up. Standing before him was a man in a Navy pilot's uniform, cap pulled low, forehead lined with deep wrinkles, silver wings gleaming on his chest. The name tag read, Captain D. Harrison. His pale blue eyes didn't look at you. They looked through you. A square jaw. A voice weighted with absolute authority. "Son," he said. The word hit like a slap. Not friendly, not casual. Cold. Dismissive. "Coach is in the back. This seat's not for you." Jalen frowned. "Sorry?" he replied. Not loudly, just puzzled. Still polite. Harrison stared at him like the seat was being trespassed. "This is business class," he continued, voice flat, utterly unbelieving. "And I'm guessing you're trying to sneak up front with a fancy-looking ticket." Jalen held up his boarding pass, steady hand. "Seat 2A. It's my ticket." The captain didn't bother to take it, just glanced. "There must be some mistake," he said sharply. "There's no way you're sitting here." His words weren't loud, but they sliced like blades, and heads had begun to turn. Jalen's heart pounded, not from fear, from injustice, from a cold, familiar sting. This wasn't new. It was the museum guard's glance when he stood too long in front of a painting, the cashier's eyes when his mother swiped a black card, the suspicion, the shrinking eyes. But this was his seat, a valid ticket, a rightful place. And yet, as Captain Harrison tilted his head slightly, waiting for him to quietly get up and leave, Jalen felt something cold curl into his gut. This was the shadow, the moment when the story shifts. And deep down, he knew. This flight was not going to be what anyone expected. Captain Douglas Harrison stood there, tall and imposing, as if he owned this space, this aircraft, and every cream leather seat lined neatly in the business class cabin. He didn't speak right away. He simply stood, his icy gray-blue eyes scanning Jalen as if trying to peel away layers of disguise. A young black teenager, alone, well-dressed, calmly sitting in seat 2A with no adult nearby. That couldn't possibly be real. Jalen sat upright, feeling the thin but razor-sharp air weaving through the seat seams, clinging to his skin. He hadn't said anything, hadn't done anything wrong. But in that moment, Captain Harrison's stare said everything. A tired, baseless suspicion, painted with the same color of prejudice Jalen had known since the first time he followed his mom into a supermarket. "You're in the wrong cabin," Harrison finally said, voice low but commanding. It wasn't a question, it was a verdict. A conclusion reached long before he opened his mouth. No need for verification, no interest in confirmation. Jalen tightened his grip on the camera strap resting on his thigh, his heartbeat now irregular. "No, sir, I have a ticket," he said, trying to stay calm. His voice was soft, respectful, measured. Not defiant, not combative, just a direct and honest response. Harrison showed no sign of care. He didn't even look at the boarding pass Jalen held out. His eyes remained fixed on the boy, as if searching for signs of deceit. "Don't play games. I've been flying for 25 years. I know who's a real passenger and who's trying to sneak into the wrong seat." Then he nodded toward the rear. "Get back to economy. Don't make me call someone to escort you." Jalen could feel the stares piling onto him. A few passengers in the business cabin had set down their magazines, paused their light conversations, and were now watching intently. A middle-aged man in a gray suit was frowning slightly. A blonde woman in seat 2C tilted her head toward her companion, whispering with bright, entertained eyes, as if witnessing a little drama to pass the time before takeoff. "Sir," Jalen said, this time more firmly, "I have a valid ticket. Seat 2A. It's a birthday gift. My mother bought it. I'm not in the wrong seat." He held out the boarding pass. The bold letters were crystal clear. Monroe, Jalen, Skyfront 311, Seat 2, A, Business. Captain Harrison glanced at it, this time with a slight frown. But the suspicion in his eyes didn't fade. It only shifted into a different form of resistance. 16? Alone? Business class? That's a real ticket? He scoffed. "Doesn't make any sense." "What exactly doesn't make sense, sir?" Jalen asked back, his voice no longer soft. It had hardened instinctively. He wasn't angry, but he knew that staying silent meant letting others believe the captain was right. "Maybe you slipped through the gate. Maybe the scanner didn't flag you. Or maybe some staff member made a mistake. I've seen it before." Harrison didn't need evidence. All he needed was his gut, and that gut was fed by instincts shaped long ago, soaked in something deeper than protocol. A flight attendant stepped forward, young, slender, her name tag reading Chloe. Her face tightened when Harrison's gaze turned toward her. "Chloe," he said, "please help this boy find his real seat in economy." Chloe looked at Jalen, then at Harrison, then at the boarding pass. The hesitation in her eyes was unmistakable. "Captain, he does have seat 2A. It's real." Her voice was quiet but loud enough for a few nearby passengers to hear. Captain Harrison narrowed his eyes. He snatched the ticket from Jalen's hand as if afraid it would vanish. His eyes scanned the lines. After a few seconds, he let out a sigh, annoyed, dismissive. "The ticket's real, but maybe it's a name mix-up, or someone used a fake ID." He nodded as though convincing himself. Jalen could feel the blood rushing to his temples. The whispers around him felt like pins piercing through the crisp shirt his mother had picked out. He had come prepared, dressed neatly, respectfully, on time. No wrinkles, no trouble. And yet he was still doubted, still judged. For what? His skin color? His age? Because no one imagined a black teenager could rightfully be here? "I'm not using a fake ticket. I didn't sneak on. My mom bought the seat. It's legit." He spoke, eyes locked forward. steady, unwavering. And who's she supposed to be? Harrison sneered. Some kid with a corporate credit card buying a fancy birthday seat? She's not some kid, Jalen replied, his tone sharpening. My mother is Cassandra Monroe, Chief Executive Officer of Monroe Equity Group. She could buy the entire cabin if she wanted to. Harrison laughed, a short, open sneer that carried full disdain. Oh, sure. A big shot CEO, huh? Then he turned to Chloe. Call security. I'm not arguing about this all day. Chloe hesitated. Captain, maybe we should double-check with the boarding staff. It'll only take a minute. You questioning my authority? Harrison snapped. Chloe shrank back slightly, nodding. No, Captain. Jalen sat still, hands on his thighs. He was no longer scared, no longer shocked. He was angry, deeply angry. It burned low in his chest, a slow flame that flared with every breath. But beneath it, his mother's voice echoed. Don't ever let them make you feel small. Your voice matters. He opened his bag and took out his phone. The screen lit up, his mom's name on speed dial. No hesitation. He hit call. 1 ring, 2 rings. Then that familiar voice came through. Steady, clear, slightly rushed from a meeting. Jalen? What's going on? He glanced at Harrison, who was now instructing another attendant to reopen the cabin gate. Jalen replied simply, Mom, we've got a problem, a big one. And the conversation that followed would not only save him from a public humiliation he'd never forget, but would also unleash a reckoning Captain Harrison never saw coming. Captain Harrison remained standing tall in the aisle of the business class cabin, his eyes sharp as a blade, still gripping the boarding pass. Jalen stared back, saying nothing, his heart pounding hard in his chest, though his face stayed composed. Around them, passengers were no longer pretending not to notice. They were watching. Clearly, a blonde woman gripped her husband's hand tighter. A young man in a Supreme hoodie removed his earbuds, leaning forward to hear better. An Asian man in seat 3C was filming discreetly, his phone hidden behind a magazine. The air grew heavier with each second, as if the entire cabin was waiting for the next act of a drama they never asked to witness. Chloe, the flight attendant, still stood nearby with her hands clasped, her expression tinged with concern. Jalen could see it now. She didn't look at him like a disruptive kid anymore. She looked like someone caught between opposing powers, someone who wanted to speak but had been silenced by hierarchy and prejudice. Captain, Chloe said, her voice soft but more resolute than before, the ticket has the correct name, correct flight, correct seat. This isn't a system error. Harrison narrowed his eyes. Are you doubting my judgment? Chloe stepped back half a pace. No, sir. Jalen turned to Harrison. His voice wasn't raised, but it was steel wrapped in velvet. I'm not getting up from this seat. It was paid for with real money, earned through real work. My mother, he paused, not from fear, but to find the right word, worked day and night to give me this gift. And I won't stand up just because you don't think I deserve it. Harrison scoffed as if he'd just heard the punchline to a bad joke. And who is she? A reality show star? Some TikToker with cash to burn? Jalen shook his head. She's the CEO of one of the biggest financial firms on the East Coast, Cassandra Monroe. If you want proof, just Google it. My name is Jalen Monroe. Harrison didn't need Google. He needed silence, submission. And clearly this kid wasn't giving him that. That's enough, he barked, raising his hand. Call security. I'm done wasting time. He turned to Chloe, who now looked visibly conflicted. Do it. Chloe opened her mouth as if to protest, but only bowed her head slightly. Yes, Captain. Jalen felt a chill crawl down his spine. This was it, the breaking point. The moment he knew if he didn't act, he'd be marched to the back of the plane like someone who didn't belong, while no one said a word. His mother's voice echoed in his head, not angry but steady and unwavering. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small. You have every right to be exactly where you belong. Jalen pulled out his phone. No hesitation, no second guessing, no need to search. Her name was already there. Mom, marked with a gold star. He tapped call. 1 ring, 2. Then her voice came through, low, familiar, slightly rushed from a meeting. Jalen? You're on board, right? He swallowed. His throat was dry, but he kept his tone steady. I'm on the plane, but there's a problem. His voice wavered, not from fear, but from restraint. The captain doesn't believe my ticket is real. He says I don't belong in seat 2. A silence on the other end. A pause, then, what's his name? Douglas Harrison, Jalen answered. Tall, white, graying hair, pale blue eyes. Cassandra Monroe didn't need more. Her voice hardened. Flight? Skyfront 311, JFK to Tokyo. She hung up without another word. Jalen knew what that meant. His mother was drawing her sword, and he didn't need to say another thing. Harrison was still motioning for another flight attendant to contact ground control. He had no idea that within minutes, the control he believed absolute would slip through his hands like sand. A man in the middle row muttered, Kids today, entitled, dreaming of seats they don't deserve. Jalen heard it clearly, but he didn't respond. He sat still, phone resting on his lap, hands clenched. Not from fear, but from restraint. In that moment, he wasn't just a humiliated teenager. He was the embodiment of something larger, a rising tide. Suddenly, a voice rang through the plane's PA system. Captain Harrison, please return to the gate immediately. Captain Harrison, return to the gate now. The entire cabin froze. A woman looked up from her cocktail. A businessman straightened in his seat. Chloe's mouth opened in shock. Harrison whipped around. What? The gate agent's voice returned. Clearer, firmer, louder. Captain Harrison, this is a directive from upper management. Return to the gate. Immediately. Jalen lifted his head. He knew. The storm had begun. On the 64th floor of a massive glass tower in the heart of Manhattan, the boardroom was so silent you could hear the soft flick of a slide turning on the wireless projector. Light from 3 large displays cast a glow over the faces of men and women in charcoal gray suits, their eyes fixed on the quarterly profit graphs. Amid that air of focus, the lone woman at the head of the table sat upright, hands interlocked, her gaze colder and sharper than the stern faces across from her. She was Cassandra Monroe, Chief Executive Officer of Monroe Equity Group, a woman who controlled more than 2.3% of the financial flow across transportation, logistics, and aviation systems throughout the eastern United States. Today was the announcement of a $4 billion strategic restructuring fund, an investor summit of global scale. She hadn't looked away from the screen, not until her phone buzzed silently beneath the table. Cassandra leaned slightly and the name flashed across the display. Jalen, accompanied by a red star icon she had assigned since the day he learned how to speed dial. She answered without hesitation. Jalen, you're on the plane, right? There was no background noise, no excited voice. Just a simple line of words, each one landing like a bullet in her chest. Mom, the captain called me a stowaway. No one in the room knew what had just happened, but they watched as CEO Monroe lifted her head, eyes no longer fixed on numbers. Her face didn't soften. It hardened, cold as tempered steel. Cassandra rose from her seat without a word, waving her hand to signal the meeting's abrupt halt. Her executive assistant started to speak, but Cassandra's voice cut in, low and firm, only loud enough for those nearby to hear. Clear the next 45 minutes. Emergency. She moved quickly out the door, phone still pressed to her ear. Where are you right now, she asked. On the plane. Skyfront 311, JFK to Tokyo. I'm in seat 2A. My name's on the ticket, but he said I can't be here. Then he said maybe I snuck into business class. Mom, he talked like I was a thief. Silence, no reaction, no questioning. Only the steady click of high heels against marble floors, each step a silent command. Cassandra entered her private office and closed the door. Her fingers tapped the glass desk. Her eyes looked beyond Manhattan, as if they could reach all the way to JFK's runway. She activated dual-line mode and called her assistant. Get me the high-level risk control hotline for Skyfront. Now then patch me through to Richard Davenport, the CEO, private line. Meanwhile, Jalen remained seated in business class, phone pressed to his ear. The anxiety in his eyes was slowly shifting into something else. Expectation. He didn't know exactly what his mother would do, but he knew she would never stay silent. By that time, Cassandra had already ended the call. but her voice was now traveling through Skyfront's internal command system, where a domino chain of consequences had just been set in motion. Richard Davenport, CEO of Skyfront, was seated in the Dallas Operations Center, having just finished a meeting with his team about new flight routes to Asia. He was known for his calm demeanor, warm smiles, skilled negotiations, and ability to avoid conflict. But he also knew that a call from Cassandra Monroe, especially from her encrypted line, was never about negotiation. "Cassandra," he greeted, maintaining his cordial tone. "I heard you needed me urgently." "Your flight 311, Cassandra replied. No greeting, no preamble. "A captain named Douglas Harrison just declared that my son, who is sitting in seat 2A with a valid ticket, is a stowaway." Richard said nothing, not out of doubt, but to calculate the fallout. "I'm sorry. I'll have the team verify right away. If there's been a mistake, I'm sure." "There's no mistake," Cassandra cut in. "He called my son a trespasser, in front of your business class passengers, in front of your cabin crew, before takeoff, on a Skyfront flight." Her tone wasn't loud, but each word struck like concrete. "You have 12 minutes. If Captain Harrison is not off that aircraft, if your PR team isn't fully mobilized, and if I don't receive a direct, formal apology from you before the 13th minute, then you won't just lose Monroe Group's transport account. You'll lose every financial, insurance, logistics, operations, and personnel contract I hold indirect equity in." Richard shot up from his chair. "Cassandra, give me 7 minutes. I'll be counting backwards." And she hung up. At that exact moment, JFK Ground Control received a directive through internal Skyfront channels. "Suspend Flight 311. Instruct the captain to return to the gate. Do not allow aircraft to depart." Chloe, the flight attendant, received the message through her earpiece. She glanced quickly toward Harrison, who had begun walking back to the cockpit. Her voice trembled under pressure. "Captain, they're asking you to return to the gate. Immediately." Harrison stopped in his tracks. "Whose order?" "High-level operations," she replied. "Internal line." Harrison's face flushed red, though he tried to maintain his authority. He cleared his throat and glanced around, as if trying to pinpoint who in the cabin had escalated the situation. Jalen looked up. He knew. This was the moment the tide began to turn. Cassandra Monroe stood in her private office, light pouring through the massive glass panels behind her, casting sharp edges across her cheekbones like a cut diamond. Cold, refined, and impenetrable. Beneath the charcoal gray suit was the body of a woman all too familiar with being underestimated, dismissed, and then rising far beyond expectations. But today it wasn't her being insulted. It was her son. And that ignited a fury inside her that didn't need to be shouted to make the world feel its tremble. She sat at her desk and hit the internal line. "Jessica, connect me directly to Richard Davenport's private number. No secretary, no email, no waiting. If you can't get him, call his wife. Now." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Jessica, her executive assistant, shoot to her feet as if doused with ice water. "Yes, Ms. Monroe." 2 minutes later, the call was connected. On the other end, Richard Davenport, CEO of Skyfront Airlines, was in his Dallas penthouse, having just left an internal strategy meeting to attend a private lunch with several Japanese investors when his phone rang. Not the office line, not his assistant. The screen read, "Monroe, urgent." He knew. That call was never about something small. He excused himself, stepped back into a side office, and shut the door. "Cassandra," he answered, his voice friendly but cautious. "Is everything all right? I want you to listen carefully. No interruptions, no clarifications." Cassandra began, her tone slicing each word like a scalpel. "My son, Jalen Monroe, is currently seated in 2A on Flight 311 from JFK to Tokyo. Ticket valid, name printed clearly, fare paid with the Monroe Black Card. And your captain, Douglas Harrison, has declared that he's a stowaway. He questioned the legitimacy of his ticket. He attempted to have my son removed from the aircraft by security." Richard froze, not from disbelief, but because he was calculating the magnitude of the firestorm building in every word she spoke. No, she cut him off. "Keep listening. I don't want a polite apology. I don't want a statement from your PR team. I want you personally to ground that flight immediately. I want Captain Harrison off that plane, resigned, suspended, I don't care. I want the entire cabin to be informed that the passenger in seat 2A was mistreated. And if within 10 minutes I don't see that process in motion, you will watch Skyfront lose every Monroe Equity Group logistics contract you're still hanging on to. And believe me, I won't stop there. Richard swallowed hard. He had always known Monroe as a strategic partner, but he had never heard her speak with this temperature, not loud, but like a volcano about to split open. Cassandra, I assure you, it will be handled. I will instruct operations myself. Harrison won't remain in that seat another minute. Just give me 6 minutes. You've got 4, she said and hung up. Richard stepped out of the room and called operations directly. Flight 311, temporary hold. Call the captain back to the gate, issue an emergency alert to the entire flight crew, and I want to hear from the gate agent within 2 minutes. Back at JFK, the Ground Operations Center received the alert, and moments later, the announcement echoed through the business class cabin. Captain Harrison, please return to the gate immediately. Repeat, Captain Douglas Harrison, return to the gate at once. Passengers began looking up, expressions shifting from confusion to curiosity, and then to wary attention. Harrison stood abruptly from his jump seat near the cockpit and stepped out into the aisle. As he walked past Jalen, his eyes still held the same suspicion, as if the boy had orchestrated the entire situation. Jalen met his gaze without flinching. He didn't know the full details of what his mother had done behind the scenes, but he could feel it. The weight lifting, the tide turning, something rising from the depths of humiliation and confusion. Harrison moved quickly down the aisle, each step heavier than the last, as if he were stomping on the last shreds of his authority. Near the cabin door, a ground crew member stood waiting, hand raised in a formal gesture, indicating the captain needed to leave the aircraft. "What the hell is going on here?" Harrison demanded. "Orders from headquarters," the man replied flatly, offering no further details. "Whatever it is, it can wait. I'm running an international flight. I have the authority to remain on board." "Not today," the ground officer said, voice as hard as steel. "This flight is being held, possibly canceled entirely, and you are being requested to leave the aircraft. Now." A jolt of disbelief shot through Harrison's spine. He looked around as if expecting someone to back him up, but no one did. Chloe stood several feet away, her gaze lowered. The passengers remained silent, but their eyes had changed, no longer looking at Jalen as a misplaced teenager, but at Harrison, as if he were the disturbance threatening their sense of order. He bit his lip and stepped off the plane. Jalen watched him go, the knot in his chest beginning to loosen. But he knew this wasn't the end. This was the moment the plane of truth began to change direction. The atmosphere inside the business class cabin seemed to be vacuumed of all sound as the voice returned over the PA system. This time, crystal clear, direct, with none of the polite tones usually reserved for pre-flight announcements. It was a command, spoken with the unmistakable weight of non-negotiable authority. "Captain Harrison, please leave the aircraft immediately. Repeat, Captain Douglas Harrison, you are requested to exit the aircraft immediately." Heads across the cabin lifted. A few narrowed their eyes. Others glanced at one another, caught between confusion and curiosity. The blonde woman in 3C lowered her champagne glass slowly. The man in a black suit who had been typing away on his laptop froze, eyes fixed on the aisle. No one smiled anymore. No one whispered. No magazine pages turned. No seat controls clicked. Everything had gone silent. Captain Harrison stood mid-cabin, frozen like wet concrete. His hand hovered over the cockpit jump seat but didn't make contact. His pale blue eyes slowly shifted toward Chloe, as if needing her to confirm what he'd just heard wasn't real. But Chloe simply stood there, hands clasped tightly in front of her, eyes clenched between duty and decency. No one spoke. No one moved. Jalen remained seated in 2A. The phone in his hand still glowed, his mother still on the line. Cassandra Monroe didn't yell. She didn't need to. She simply said one sentence, calm and firm. "Stay where you are. Don't worry. Everything is happening exactly as it should." And just like that, Jalen's pulse began to slow, not completely calm, but no longer panicked. He tightened his grip on the phone with one hand, while the other rested on the camera in his lap, a quiet gesture to anchor himself from falling apart emotionally. Captain Harrison turned around, his eyes scanning the cabin. He didn't speak. The silence dragged out 10 seconds, louder than any announcement. Finally, he began walking slowly toward the aircraft door, where a ground agent was already waiting, holding a placard with his name printed on it. Jalen noticed Harrison's lips pressed into a tight line, jaw clenched like stone, his eyes stripped of disdain, replaced by the slow dawning of humiliation. Still, no one spoke. No one intervened. Not a single passenger asked, "What's going on?" No one stood up for him. They all knew, even if no one said it. Captain Harrison approached the aircraft door. Each step was a stomp on the shadow of authority he once believed was unshakable. Just before stepping off, he paused for a split second and looked back. Not at the passengers, but at Jalen. And in that gaze, there was no more arrogance, only confusion. Silent panic in the eyes of a man who had just realized he was no longer the center of the universe. And then he stepped off the aircraft. The sound of the front cabin door closing came like a soft but final verdict. 1 second, 2, 3. Then the silence shattered into a low wave of murmurs, whispers, conversations breaking loose. The blonde woman turned to her seatmate and whispered, "First time I've ever seen a captain get kicked off mid-flight." A man behind them muttered, "Was it because of that kid?" A female executive set down her copy of The New Yorker and looked straight at Jalen, not with pity, but with a quiet respect. Chloe approached Jalen, her expression still shaken. Her voice was hoarse but full of emotion. "I'm sorry for everything. I know you didn't do anything wrong." Jalen nodded gently. He didn't blame her. Chloe was just one of hundreds caught in a system where power was defined by who shouted louder, not by who was right. He knew that truth. A senior staff member entered the cabin. Male, navy blue suit with a skyfront badge, his stride brisk and purposeful. He walked straight to Chloe, whispered something quickly, then turned to Jalen and bowed slightly. "Mr. Monroe, I'm Marcus Shaw, head of Premium Customer Services. I'll be personally handling all further proceedings. We've initiated the protocol for replacing the captain. Within 20 minutes, the flight will resume. I sincerely apologize for the unacceptable experience you've just endured." Jalen nodded, remaining composed, though his heart pounded like a festival drum, not from triumph, but because he knew this was a point of no return. From here on, this wasn't just about Seat 2A. The PA system chimed again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats. Flight 311 is temporarily delayed for 30 minutes as we complete a captain change. Thank you for your patience." A few passengers sighed, a few grumbled, but no one looked at Jalen with suspicion anymore. Now he was the center no one dared touch. Jalen's phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Handled. Everything is in my hands now. Don't act, don't speak. I'll take care of the rest." And Jalen understood. The rest, that was the real storm. The tension in the business class cabin had begun to ease gradually after Captain Harrison left the aircraft. But no one expected the fragile calm to be shattered entirely by a single man in a gray suit. He stepped on board with a face void of expression, but a voice weighted like a sentence handed down. He walked straight toward Jalen, ignoring every other passenger, stopping only to offer a quiet bow of respect. "Mr. Monroe, on behalf of Skyfront Airlines executive leadership, I offer our deepest apologies. This flight has been officially canceled due to internal operational issues." The entire cabin seemed to stop breathing again. But it wasn't fear, it was awareness. Everyone knew this wasn't some routine, internal operational issue. This was a plug pulled from the highest, coldest, most decisive reaches of global finance. By the mother of the black boy quietly seated in 2A, Chloe, the flight attendant, raised a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. A woman in row 4 shook her head and murmured, "I knew it. It wasn't going to end that easily." An older man in a dove-gray suit began packing up his tablet, his face stunned as though he'd just witnessed something beyond his comprehension. Jalen said nothing. He simply nodded at the man in the gray suit, then glanced toward the aircraft door. He knew. This wasn't an ending. It was a pivot. A moment when an entire system had been frozen mid-motion, quietly but absolutely. Cassandra Monroe was not aboard the plane. She didn't need to be. From the headquarters of Monroe Equity Group in Manhattan, a single phone call lasting less than 90 seconds had bent the flight path of an entire airline, halted a multi-million-dollar operation, and thrown Skyfront's PR team into chaos. And the most chilling part? She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She didn't slam a desk. She simply gave one final order. Cancel that flight, immediately. Don't let it take off. And with those words, a $280 million Boeing sat motionless, like a school child sentenced to stand in the corner. Captain Harrison, once the unshakable authority in the sky, was now seated alone in the crew lounge, head lowered in silence. A printed fax on official letterhead sat before him. Temporary suspension pending internal investigation, effective immediately. He stared at it blankly. No questions, no objections, no fight, because he knew no one in the company would stand with him now. As for Jalen, he remained seated just as before, camera resting neatly on his lap, eyes gazing out the airplane window where Tokyo still lingered somewhere far off in his imagination. His first street photography trip was gone, but in its place he now had another image, one not captured through a lens, but etched into memory. A young black boy mistaken for a stowaway, and an entire system forced to halt simply for having judged him based on the color of his skin. Chloe stepped forward gently, holding an unopened can of orange juice, her hand slightly trembling. "I wasn't sure if I should give this to you," she said, voice soft. "But if it were my little brother, I'd want him to know he wasn't alone in this." Jalen looked at her, then slowly reached out and accepted the can. He didn't say anything, but his eyes said it all. Outside, the media had already begun to arrive. A photographer from the New York Chronicle raised his lens toward the aircraft through the terminal glass. A CNN reporter in a black suit was arguing with security, trying to access the VIP area. A few passengers were already on their phones. "I'm at Seattle Airport. Skyfront Flight 207 just got canceled mid-boarding. I think it's connected to that discrimination case." And the messages began spreading across X, formerly Twitter. The hashtag number sign, Seat 2A, started blinking, line by line, moment by moment. Jalen unlocked his phone. A text from his mother appeared. "Exit through the West VIP gate. Marcus will escort you via private access. I'll handle the press." He didn't need to ask questions. He didn't need to argue. He stood up and bowed gently toward Chloe. The entire business class cabin watched him, not with suspicion anymore, but with a quiet, collective respect. And as Jalen stepped off the aircraft, leaving Seat 2A behind, empty and undisturbed, everyone knew no one else would be sitting there today, or any day after. No one was truly prepared for the speed at which a video under 30 seconds could spread. But the internet never needed preparation, only a moment of injustice and a hashtag strong enough to crack the surface. That morning, before the sun had even risen over the West Coast, the seat of justice became the #1 trending topic nationwide, surpassing weather, sports, and politics. The video, captured by a passenger's phone, showed Captain Harrison leaning forward, pointing at Jalen Monroe and saying, "You can't sit here. This isn't your seat," with a dismissive glare, a voice dripping with condescension, and a refusal to even check the boarding pass. Just because Jalen was a black teenager. It lit the fuse for a digital firestorm. The media swarmed in. From the New York Times to BuzzFeed News, CNN to the Shade Room, every headline now carried the words Captain Harrison and Seat 2A. Within just 48 hours, Skyfront Airlines was forced to hold an emergency press conference to address the backlash. A spokesperson in a dark blue suit stood in front of dozens of cameras, voice stretched thin. "We sincerely apologize to the Monroe family and to the public. We were wrong, and Captain Harrison has been suspended indefinitely pending investigation." But the crisis didn't stop there. The FAA launched a formal inquiry. An internal audit began immediately, reviewing Harrison's professional conduct over his 17-year career. The findings revealed it wasn't his first offense. There had been a complaint from an Asian American female passenger in 2021, a Latino maintenance worker in 2019, and a black intern in 2017, all indicating a consistent pattern of implicit bias that the airline had overlooked. But what truly inflamed public sentiment wasn't in the reports. It was a tearful live stream by Harrison's ex-wife, the same woman who had filed for divorce just 3 months prior. In the video, she said, "I used to believe my husband was just strict, but when I saw how he treated a child who had done nothing wrong, I realized some things can't be fixed with time." And from that moment, the unraveling began. The family home in Bellevue was suddenly listed for sale, below market value. Former neighbors stopped greeting him on the street. The Retired Pilots Association rescinded his invitation to speak at their annual summit. A publishing house that had contracted him to write a memoir released a brief statement. Project indefinitely suspended. Layer by layer, badge by badge, plaque by plaque, his legacy was stripped away. And the man who once commanded a Boeing 787 now sat alone in a temporary rental apartment, news tickers blaring on a screen he could no longer control, facing airspace that no longer belonged to him. Meanwhile, Jalen was living in a completely different world, one where every step he took was watched by millions of eyes. He received hundreds of messages a day, some calling him a silent hero, others asking for permission to include his story in their college essays. There were even apologies from white strangers who admitted to unknowingly perpetuating harmful assumptions in the past. But amidst all the attention and support, Jalen felt only one thing: exhaustion. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel satisfied watching the news of Harrison's suspension. He wasn't pleased to hear that the man had been left by his wife. What stayed with him was that moment, being stopped in the business class cabin, treated like a stowaway despite holding a legitimate boarding pass, being told he didn't belong, and that feeling, it didn't vanish just because the other man's world collapsed. It stayed like a scar, invisible to the eye but permanent beneath the surface. Cassandra Monroe, his mother, was different. She handled the crisis like a chess master 3 moves ahead. A concise statement from Monroe Equity Group was sent to the press. "The Monroe family is not seeking compensation. They are seeking change." And change truly began to unfold. A new piece of legislation was proposed in the Senate, named the Passenger Dignity Act, mandating unconscious bias training for all crew members across U.S. domestic airlines. A scholarship program for Black youth interested in aviation was launched under the name the 2A Initiative, and most notably, a digital community forum was established, an online space for people to share stories of silent discrimination and to finally be heard. Jalen didn't attend the press conferences. He didn't go live. He declined 3 major talk show invitations, including one from The Ellen Show. Instead, he stayed in his room with an undeveloped Kodak film roll still lying on his desk. One unfinished frame, one photo never taken. But even so, he knew he had already captured something greater than any image, a sliver of truth, a moment when the world had to pause and face itself. And across the country, in a small rental apartment, an aging man sat quietly, staring out at the blinking streetlights beyond his window. His hand trembled slightly as he held a cold cup of coffee. No one knew what he was thinking, but perhaps, somewhere deep inside, he was replaying the moment he pointed at a boy and said, "You don't belong here," and realizing that sometimes a single sentence is enough to bring down everything. Tuesday morning, a black SUV pulled up quietly in front of the Monroe residence. No sirens, no cameras, just a middle-aged woman in a silver-gray blazer stepping out, holding a firm envelope in her hand. Her name was Evelyn Price, Chief Executive Officer of Skyfront Airlines, and she had flown in from Chicago just 2 hours earlier to carry out the most difficult mission of her career, to apologize to a 16-year-old boy. Cassandra Monroe received her in the side foyer, eyes sharp, as always, though not unkind. Evelyn extended the envelope first, her hands slightly trembling. "We offer our deepest apologies, on behalf of the entire airline. There is no justification for what happened on Flight 478. Cassandra nodded slightly, her hands unmoved. Evelyn continued, "Skyfront has accepted the full terms laid out by the FAA. Captain Harrison has been suspended, and at our request, we'd like to offer Jalen a personal apology and a gift." Cassandra tilted her head. "A gift?" Evelyn exhaled. A lifetime first-class pass for all routes, global, unlimited. Cassandra said nothing. Just then, Jalen came down the stairs. The space grew still, as though time itself had frozen. Evelyn turned toward him with a smile that strained to appear warm. Jalen, we know this hasn't been easy, and we hope, in some small way, this gesture might help you feel more valued on your future journeys. Jalen looked at the envelope, then at the woman. He nodded gently and replied calmly, Thank you, but I don't need a private jet, and I don't need special treatment. Evelyn blinked. You mean? Jalen cut in, his voice still measured. I just want to be treated like any other passenger, like everyone else. Evelyn stood still. Cassandra's lips curled into a subtle smirk, a quiet sign of agreement. That afternoon, a short headline appeared on a respected media outlet. Boy discriminated against on plane rejects lifetime perks. The quote, I just want to be treated like everyone else, began spreading like a gentle yet powerful declaration. That evening in his room, Jalen sat in front of his computer, typing an email. No one asked him to write it, but he knew he had to. The recipient, Captain Thomas Harrison. He wrote, I don't want you to lose your job. I'm not happy your family is falling apart. I don't believe one mistake defines who you are, but it hurt me, and I think we should meet. 2 days later, at Memorial Park on the city's west side, where the maple trees were beginning to blush with early fall, Jalen approached a bench near the lake and saw him. Thomas Harrison, no longer in uniform, no longer proud. He wore a worn-out khaki jacket, sitting silently, eyes fixed on the still water. Jalen walked up without a word. Harrison looked up, his eyes sunken, tired and wordless. After a long moment, he spoke. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Jalen nodded. I didn't want this to end in silence. They sat there, not as a captain and a passenger, but as two human beings, one who had his dignity bruised, and one who finally saw the cost of his internal bias. Harrison sighed, voice hoarse as if wind had been scraping his throat for months. I used to think I was fair. I didn't realize. I judged you in just 3 seconds. Jalen didn't react. He looked straight at him. You're not the first to do that, but you're the first who had the power to act on that judgment immediately, and that's what hurt most. Harrison lowered his head. I've lost many things, but the part that hurts the most is knowing I made a kid call his mom because he was afraid of being dragged off a plane. The air between them felt heavy. After a long pause, Jalen stood. He stepped in front of Harrison, stopped, and said, I forgive you, but I won't forget. Harrison looked up, eyes welling with tears, but Jalen had already turned away. Not out of disdain, but because forgiveness, once given, required no further acknowledgement. Forgiveness was, first and foremost, a way to free yourself. On the way home, Jalen didn't play any music. He just sat quietly, staring out the window. Outside, the leaves were falling gently, as if all the weight in the world was drifting to the ground, vanishing into the wind. Back at the Monroe Equity Group office, Cassandra Monroe received a call from a media outlet requesting an interview with her and her son. She declined. We didn't do this for fame, but inside she knew one thing for certain. Her son had grown into a man in a way no one could have taught, without shouting, without demands, without a stage. All he ever needed was a seat and one sentence. I just want to be treated like everyone else. Winter came gently to New York. After everything that had happened, Jalen returned to school with a completely different spirit. Not because he had been recognized as the boy from Seat 2A across the media, not because of the respectful handshakes or sympathetic glances from those who once ignored him in the hallway, but because something inside Jalen had changed. He no longer walked quickly to avoid people's eyes. He no longer hesitated to raise his hand in class. And more importantly, he had begun to realize the power within himself. Cassandra Monroe had changed too. From a powerful woman used to controlling everything, she now deliberately stepped back to let Jalen step forward. During a social justice seminar at Brown University, where Jalen had been invited as a special guest, Cassandra sat in the back row, not interfering, not leading. She just sat there, listening to her 16-year-old son talk about an airplane seat as a symbol of dignity and quiet resilience. I don't need special treatment, he said. I just want to be seen as a person, without being judged before I speak. The applause was loud, but what moved Cassandra the most was when a young Asian girl stood up, tears in her eyes, and said, I never thought I could sit in the front row until I watched your video. That night in the car ride home, Cassandra turned to Jalen and said softly, You taught me something I thought I already knew. Jalen just smiled, saying nothing. A few weeks later, they officially announced the founding of a nonprofit organization called the 2A Initiative. Its mission, to support children who are underestimated because of their background, skin color, or appearance, to help them access quality education, international exchange programs, and most importantly, training in self-worth, self-awareness, and the ability to speak their truth. The first headquarters was established in the Bronx, New York, but within 2 months, new offices opened in Chicago, then Atlanta, and Los Angeles. No dramatic images, no appeals based on suffering. Every 2A initiative campaign began with a single, simple line. Seat 2A, not everyone has a ticket, but everyone deserves a place. At the opening of the Dallas Center, a tall man stood quietly in the back row. He wasn't wearing a uniform. His jacket had a patch. Volunteer, 2A. It was Thomas Harrison. Since his meeting with Jalen in the park, he had emailed to volunteer. No one asked him to. No one paid him. But Harrison went from school to school, standing in front of classrooms full of future pilots, repeating one sentence. Don't become me. Learn to see a person with kindness, not by their resume or appearance. As the story spread, there were critics. Many questioned why Skyfront would allow Harrison to remain within the airline ecosystem. But it was Jalen himself who wrote a handwritten letter to the airline's board of directors, saying, The only way someone truly changes is if they're given the opportunity to prove it. And for the first time, a victim did not call for punishment, but invited redemption through sustained action. The media began paying attention again, but this time, not to Jalen. This time, it was the way he remained silent, yet left behind an echo. On a well-known talk show, the host asked him, If you could go back to that moment in seat 2A, what would you do differently? Jalen shook his head and said, I'd still sit quietly, but this time, I'd smile. Cassandra was invited to a global conference on women's leadership and racial equity in corporate spaces. She didn't talk about the airline. She spoke of her son, the boy who used to quietly take pictures of people on the street without anyone noticing. She said, We've become too used to letting people like my son be invisible, and when the invisible begin to speak, the whole system jolts. By the following spring, the 2A Initiative was invited to partner with the U.S. Department of Education to pilot a new curriculum in 50 public schools across America. The program was called Look Again Before You See, a course designed to help both students and educators recognize unconscious bias and dismantle it using emotional intelligence. Every classroom featured a large photo of an airplane seat with the words, Honor doesn't come with a boarding class. Finally, at the one-year anniversary summit of the organization, Cassandra stepped on stage to introduce the final speaker. She didn't need a script. She simply said, The next speaker is the reason we are here. And Jalen walked up. No suit, no slides, just holding a photograph. Seat 2A. He looked at the crowd and said, I used to think I was just a victim. Now I know. I'm a survivor. And more than that, I'm someone rebuilding the ship others tried to sink. The room rose in a standing ovation, but no one cried. There was only warmth, like sunlight breaking through after a long winter. And in that moment, Cassandra understood something deeply. You don't have to be a CEO or a billionaire or a celebrity. You just have to be a mother who knows when to stand up and when to let your child walk alone. Seat 2A was no longer just a seat. It was a memory, a lesson, a promise, and a legacy. You see, sometimes justice doesn't have to shout. Sometimes all it takes is a seat and a boy brave enough not to give it up. If you've ever been misjudged because of how you look, ever been doubted just for being yourself, then this story was meant for you. We can't change the past, but we can change how we treat each other. Today, from classrooms to airplanes, from the first glance to the first word. And if this touched your heart, If you believe that everyone deserves respect without needing to prove it through appearance or status, then leave a comment below. Share your story or simply write, "I won't look away." Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder today. You are not invisible. You never were.